The latch on my study door still gave that faint, familiar click, soft enough to miss, unless you were its rightful owner. Still lying in bed, I counted my daughter-in-law's steps as they crept past my room, careful, entitled. As the citrus perfume she wore to dinner drifted through the hallway, it clashed with the silence she thought I couldn't hear. While she opened my drawer with fingers that never asked, I kept mine steady on the edge of my journal. The same woman who smiled across my table each night had been rewriting my legacy behind my back. That's when I let the camera hidden in Pride and Prejudice record what even family wouldn't admit out loud. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The house always settled at midnight. A soft creak in the baseboards, a sigh in the vents. But tonight, Eleanor Pierce heard something new. A click. A delicate metallic whisper from the study door. The kind a distracted hand makes when it forgets to close a latch all the way. She set her teacup down, her pulse beating once, twice, before she told herself not to be ridiculous. Still, when she entered the study the next morning, the drawer beneath her writing desk was open by a finger's width. The brass handle glinted like a raised eyebrow. Her favorite pen, the one with the tiny scratch across its silver clip, lay crooked on the blotter. Not missing, just moved, as though someone had tested the weight of it, then changed their mind. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. The morning light slanting across her stacks of paper and the smell of cedar polish hanging faintly in the air. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, which was precisely what unsettled her. At breakfast, she mentioned it lightly. "Someone's been in my study," she said, reaching for the jam jar. My desk drawer was open again. Tyler didn't look up from his tablet. "Probably Noah," he said, his tone half apologetic, half distracted. "He likes your fountain pens. You know how kids are." Across the table, Hannah smiled. It was the kind of smile that practiced women wear. Perfectly symmetrical, pleasant, and just warm enough to look genuine. "You must be imagining it, Eleanor," she said, stirring her coffee. "You're the only one who ever goes in there." Eleanor met her gaze for a moment too long. Hannah didn't flinch. The woman had the composure of someone who had already decided what the truth was going to be. Later that afternoon, Eleanor retreated to her sanctuary, the study she'd built over 4 decades of teaching and writing. She trailed a finger along the edge of the mahogany desk, tracing the grooves her hands had carved into habit. Everything in that room meant something. The framed photos of her students' book club, the shelf of first editions, the faint ink stains on her rug. Noah's voice drifted from the hallway, his laughter muffled through the wall. A sound she loved. He was the only one who still knocked before entering. She sat, picked up her pen, and opened her journal. The heavy leather-bound one, its pages filled with tight loops of blue ink. She wrote down the date, then paused. Drawer ajar. Pen displaced. Tyler unconcerned. Hannah smiling. Her handwriting steadied her. The act of logging what others dismissed gave the moment gravity. Paper didn't lie, and it didn't gaslight. The sun had set by the time she finished her entry. She closed the journal carefully, fingers hovering over the cover as though sealing a secret inside. Then she stood, crossed the room to the far corner where the floorboard lifted just slightly at one edge, an imperfection she'd meant to fix years ago, but never did. She pried it up with the flat end of her ruler, revealing a hollow space no larger than a shoebox. Inside, she placed the journal and eased the board back into place. The wood settled with a soft thunk, as though the house itself agreed to keep quiet. For a moment she simply listened. The refrigerator hummed. A distant dog barked. Nothing else. Yet the silence didn't reassure her. It only made the earlier click seem louder in memory, like an unanswered question replaying itself. In bed, she lay awake beside the soft glow of her nightstand lamp. She could hear the faint shuffle of someone moving down the hallway, light, deliberate steps. The floorboards groaned once near her door, then went still. Eleanor kept her breathing even, her eyes half closed, pretending to sleep. The sound faded toward the back of the house, toward her study. She waited a full minute before sitting up, her hand hovering over the lamp switch. She could almost picture it, the faint outline of a woman standing at her desk, fingers moving over her things as if entitled to them. Eleanor reached for her pen and jot pad on the nightstand. She didn't write words this time, just drew a small circle and shaded it in, over and over, until the paper almost tore. By morning, the drawer would be closed again. The pen would be back in its proper place. And Tyler would tell her she was worrying too much. But Eleanor Pierce knew the sound of her own home breathing. And last night, it had exhaled something foreign. She smiled faintly to herself, not fearfully, but like a teacher who already knows the ending of the story her student hasn't realized she's telling. Because next time, she thought, she'd be ready for the click. By the following week, Eleanor stopped telling herself it was coincidence. Coincidence didn't close drawers to the same exact angle, or return books out of alphabetical order by a single misplaced spine. Coincidence didn't smell faintly of perfume she never owned. She stood in the center of her study that morning, hands steady, eyes tracing the angles of everything she'd once arranged without thinking. The desk chair faced the wrong direction by an inch. The door's latch, she'd marked it in pencil, hung slightly open again. She could feel it now, that faint electrical charge in the air before a storm. Someone else's presence, long gone but freshly imprinted. So she began to measure. The first night, she placed a thin strip of masking tape along the top edge of each drawer. The tape slit at the seam. A millimeter's misalignment would tell her everything. Then she measured the space between the study door and its jamb, 3/16 of an inch when fully shut, and jotted it on a post-it she stuck beneath the baseboard. Eleanor Pierce, former English teacher, knew that proof wasn't about what you felt. It was about what you could show, clearly, in sequence, like a thesis supported by evidence. Still, the feeling remained, that invisible line running down her spine each time the house grew too quiet. That night, before heading to bed, she sprinkled a thin layer of baby powder along the floorboards between her desk and the door. It shimmered faintly in the lamplight, an innocent dusting that could have been forgotten flour. When she turned off the lamp, the study looked almost serene. Almost. The next morning, the powder told its story. 4 prints, partial, deliberate, small. Not a man's, not a child's. A woman's, size 7 at most. The heel of one smudged where the step had pivoted, as though whoever it was had turned toward the bookshelf before leaving. Eleanor crouched, her knee protesting the motion, and measured the distance between steps with a ruler. Average stride, calm pace, no panic, no rush. Whoever it was, she was comfortable here. She brushed a bit of powder onto a note card, folded it into an envelope, and wrote the date. Then she vacuumed every trace, restoring the room to its pristine order. Evidence could be invisible and still exist. When Tyler came home that evening, she met him in the kitchen, the smell of roasted chicken in the air. "Tyler," she said quietly, "I found footprints." He looked up from the mail, brow furrowing. "Footprints?" "In my study. Size 7 sneakers." He smiled tiredly, that same pacifying expression he used when Noah spilled paint on the carpet. "Hannah's probably been printing something late at night. You know she's grading papers half the time after you go to bed." Eleanor's eyes didn't move from his face. "Not in my study. She's not." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, please. You're overthinking." "I'm observing," she interrupted, voice calm and measured, like she was back in her classroom correcting an essay. "There's a difference." He hesitated, then shrugged, giving up the conversation the way he always did, surrendering to the path of least resistance. If it bothers you, lock the door. When he left, she whispered to the empty room, "It's already locked." That night, the silence pressed heavier against the walls. Eleanor sat at her desk, the faint tick of the wall clock marking time with the steadiness of a heartbeat. She opened her journal, hesitated, and then picked up the phone. Carol Tran answered on the second ring. "You never call after 9 unless it's important." "I think someone's breaking into my study," Eleanor said, her voice almost clinical in its restraint. Carol paused. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet," Eleanor said, "but I'm collecting it." "Then don't confront her, don't accuse. You don't need feelings, Ellie. You need proof." The word landed like a directive, not advice. Proof. That was the language of defense, the currency of credibility. Eleanor sat there long after the call ended, the dial tone humming faintly like static. She stared at her hands, ink-stained and trembling slightly, not from fear, but from purpose. Out the window, the yard was a pale wash of moonlight. The study reflected her own face back at her in the glass. A faint, steady ghost of a woman who'd been dismissed one too many times. She reached over and reset the lock on her desk drawer, turning it until she heard the faint click she now knew too well. Then she whispered to herself, "Let's see where you step next." The next morning, Eleanor Pierce parked her Buick outside Murphy's Tech Repair, a squat brick shop sandwiched between a vape store and an insurance office. The sign out front read, "We fix what others can't." She stepped inside to the dry hum of soldering irons and the faint metallic tang of circuit boards. Behind the counter, Dean Murphy looked up from a half-dissembled laptop. He was broader now than the boy she remembered, the one who once stayed after class to talk about Fahrenheit 451. But his eyes were the same, bright and alert, as though every problem was a puzzle waiting for precision. "Mrs. Pierce?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't think I'd see you again outside book club." She smiled faintly. "I need a favor." "A discreet one." He gestured her toward the back room, curiosity sharpening his expression. "Discreet's a relative term, but I'm listening." Eleanor placed a hollowed-out hardcover on his workbench. Pride and Prejudice, its spine intact, pages neatly glued together except for a rectangular cavity inside. "I'd like a camera installed here," she said evenly. "Analog. No Wi-Fi, no cloud. Just an SD card." Dean blinked. "That's old school." "Precisely," she said. "I want something she can't disable with a smartphone." The word she lingered in the air. Dean didn't ask who. He simply nodded, the kind of man who understood that privacy, once violated, didn't need explanation. By mid-afternoon, he'd fitted the miniature lens behind the printed title page, the whole camouflaged by the faint curl of a serif. He demonstrated the tiny switch along the book's inner binding. Motion activated, silent, battery lasts 48 hours. Eleanor watched every move, her eyes sharp, intent. "And you're sure it can't be hacked?" "Not unless someone's got a time machine to 1998, he said, smiling. She allowed herself a small laugh. Perfect. When she left the shop, she could feel the weight of the book in her bag, heavier than paper, heavier than its story. A relic repurposed for defense. That evening, the house smelled of sugar and cinnamon. Eleanor had baked cookies for the first time in months, a ritual she'd chosen deliberately. Calm women bake. Innocent women bake. It was the perfect camouflage. When Tyler came home, she handed him a plate still warm. "For you and Noah." He kissed her cheek distractedly and disappeared down the hall, the day's exhaustion radiating off him. Minutes later, Hannah appeared in the doorway, hair swept into a loose bun, her expression as neutral as marble. "Smells amazing," she said. "You're spoiling them." Eleanor slid another batch onto the cooling rack. Habit. Hannah lingered, eyes flicking toward the hallway where Eleanor's study sat behind its closed door. I might print something later tonight. You mind if I use your desk? The printer in our rooms jammed again. Eleanor looked up, wiping flour from her hands. Her smile was mild, almost indulgent. Be my guest. Their eyes held for one long, silent beat, neither woman blinking. Then Hannah turned, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. Eleanor waited until she was gone before glancing toward the clock. 9:12 p.m. She reached for the plate of cookies, arranging them neatly, the act calming her heartbeat to something measured. At 10:30, the house fell into its nightly hush. Noah's room went dark. Tyler's snores carried faintly through the vents. Eleanor sat in the armchair by her window, a thin throw over her knees, the book resting innocently on her shelf. Every tick of the clock was a pulse in her ears, every creak of the floorboard, a ghost of last week's footprints. She closed her eyes, pretending to rest. Time stretched. Midnight passed. At 2:47 a.m., motion woke the silent watcher inside Pride and Prejudice. The camera's red diode blinked once inside its paper cocoon, unseen. The lens came alive with mechanical stillness, recording what it had waited days to witness. In the faint wash of moonlight, a shadow crossed the threshold of the study. Careful, slow, feminine. A hand reached for the drawer. A whisper of fabric brushed the desk. The image captured everything. The glint of pale hair, the curve of a familiar shoulder, the reflection of light off a wedding band. Then the camera clicked softly back to sleep. Down the hall, Eleanor's eyes opened in the dark, as though she'd felt the shift in the air itself. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She just whispered into the silence, "Got you." Morning came brittle and bright, the kind of Colorado light that made even dust motes look like evidence. Eleanor sat at her desk with the hollowed Pride and Prejudice open in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the tiny SD card, no bigger than her thumbnail, as if it were an explosive she was afraid to arm. She slid it into the slot on her old laptop. No internet connection, no sync to the cloud, just the quiet whir of a machine older than Hannah's marriage vows. The screen blinked once, then filled with grainy black and white footage. 2:46 a.m. The timestamp pulsed faintly in the corner. The frame showed the familiar silhouette of her study door easing open. Then came Hannah, barefoot, calm, no hesitation. Eleanor's throat tightened as she watched her daughter-in-law glide to the desk like a woman entering her own office. Hannah's hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the faint glow of the nightlight from the hall. She moved with purpose, pulling open the locked drawer Eleanor had tested dozens of times. It gave instantly, as though the lock had been picked or quietly disabled long ago. Hannah lifted a folder from the drawer, leafed through pages until she found the notarized trust documents Eleanor had signed years earlier. Then, phone in hand, she began taking photographs. Flash off, shutter muted. The phone's screen cast a ghostly blue sheen across her face. Eleanor leaned closer to the laptop, her knuckles whitening against the desk. Hannah's lips moved, soundless on camera. But Eleanor, lip-reading from years in front of distracted students, caught the shape of the words. She doesn't even deserve this house. For a long moment, Hannah just stood there, staring at the documents as if she were holding her own inheritance. Then she tucked the papers back, closed the drawer halfway, precisely halfway, and turned off the lamp. The footage ended with the faint reflection of her wedding ring catching the light. Eleanor sat perfectly still. The house around her was silent except for the ticking clock, and even that seemed to hesitate. The footage ran out. The truth didn't. She ejected the SD card, labeled it with the date and time in her careful script, March 9th, 2:47 a.m., and slid it into a small archival envelope. The weight of it in her palm was nothing, but it felt heavier than the world. At noon, she drove back to Murphy's Tech Repair. Dean was waiting near the counter, wiping oil from his fingers. "So," he said, reading her face, "you caught something." Eleanor nodded. "I caught enough." He followed her to the back, and when she showed him the footage, he whistled softly. "Damn. You want me to install audio next time?" You'd get her whole monologue. Eleanor shut the laptop with quiet finality. "No, words aren't the problem. Behavior is." Dean studied her a moment, the way people do when they realize the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. "You sure you know what you're doing?" "I've spent 40 years teaching teenagers to plagiarize less," she said. "I know how to trace intent." That evening, Carol Tran sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching the footage again on Eleanor's screen. The house was dark except for a pool of lamplight, their faces pale in its glow. Carol's lawyer instincts sharpened with every frame. "This isn't curiosity," she said when it ended. "This is intentional exposure. She's photographing financial material that isn't hers." Eleanor folded her hands, steady as a surgeon's. "She wants to take what doesn't belong to her." Carol gave a small nod. "Then you'll need a timeline, file logs, consistency." "I've already started," Eleanor said, lifting a small index box beside her chair. Each card was dated and labeled: drawer positions, lock checks, prints, the night she called Dean. A teacher's archive of betrayal. Carol exhaled slowly, almost admiringly. "You're building a case, Ellie." Eleanor looked toward the darkened hallway. "No," she said softly. "I'm building a wall." Later that night, when everyone else had gone to bed, she returned to the study. The hollow book sat back in its place on the shelf. She traced a finger over its spine, then over the floorboard where her journal slept beneath. For a long time she listened. To the refrigerator's hum, the wind rattling the maple outside, the slow inhale of her house. Nothing stirred, but she left the desk lamp on anyway, bathing the room in a small circle of light, a stage awaiting its next act. And just before she turned to leave, she murmured to the empty air. She wanted proof of ownership. I'll give her proof she'll never recover from. By Monday morning, Eleanor's quiet had hardened into something deliberate. She brewed her coffee the same as always, buttered her toast, even checked the mail. But the motions were armor now, not habit. She'd stopped flinching at the sound of the study door because the game had changed. At 9 sharp, Carol Tran met her at the county clerk's office, a beige building that smelled faintly of toner and bureaucracy. The air hummed with the sound of stamping machines and low conversation. Carol spread a series of papers across the counter. "Once this is filed," she said, tapping the top page, "no one can challenge it without Noah's consent." Eleanor nodded, pen in hand. Her signature flowed cleanly, each letter steady. The act felt less like signing and more like sealing a vault. The clerk notarized, stamped, and returned the documents. "Congratulations," she said absently, sliding the receipt forward. Eleanor folded it neatly into her purse. "Thank you. It's not a celebration, it's insurance." By the time she stepped back into the crisp Colorado air, the house was no longer hers to lose, at least, not to Hannah Pierce. That afternoon, the sun turned the living room's picture frames into tiny mirrors. The framed deed that had hung in the hallway for years, a symbol of everything Eleanor and her late husband had built, was gone. Only a faint square of lighter paint remained on the wall, like a scar of ownership erased. Eleanor sat on the edge of her armchair, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. Hannah came home early, the front door slamming just a beat too loud. "Where's the house paper?" she asked, trying for casual and failing spectacularly. Eleanor looked up from her crossword puzzle, glasses perched low on her nose. "Things change." "Change?" Hannah repeated. "That's a legal document." "It was," Eleanor corrected. Now it's a legal boundary. For the first time, Hannah's composure cracked. The faintest twitch in her jaw, a flicker of disbelief. You had no right. Eleanor folded the newspaper slowly. Actually, I had every right. You forget, Hannah. I'm not dead yet. The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through the room. From the hallway, Noah's footsteps paused. Tyler's voice, hesitant, called from the kitchen. Everything okay? Hannah smiled without turning. Just a misunderstanding. Eleanor rose, meeting her daughter-in-law's eyes, calm as a winter pond. Yes, she said softly, but not mine. That evening, Carol texted a photo. The county seal stamped over a new deed. Filed and recorded. Noah Pierce, sole future heir. Eleanor saved the image, printing a hard copy for her index box. She slid it behind the envelope marked March 9th and locked the drawer. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the maple branches against the windows like fingers demanding entry. Inside, Eleanor poured herself a glass of sherry and sat by the window, watching the first hints of dusk settle over the neighborhood. Across the street, the neighbors' lights flickered on, and two women from the HOA strolled by with their dogs. Their voices carried just enough through the open vent. Did she sell it? One asked. Heard she's moving into assisted living, the other said. Her daughter-in-law's probably handling it. Eleanor smiled to herself, sipping slowly. Let them guess. Let them invent. Every rumor was misdirection, every whisper another layer of fog around the truth. She turned off the lamp, leaving the house in semi-darkness, and climbed the stairs one deliberate step at a time. In the hallway, the blank space where the deed had hung seemed to watch her back. When she reached her study, she paused at the door, listening. Nothing. Not a creak, not a click. She opened it, flicked on the light, and looked around the orderly room. The shelves, the books, the floorboard that hid her journal, the book that hid her camera. Everything was in place. Everything except the sense of finality. She whispered into the quiet, You wanted the house, Hannah. Now you can't even touch its name. Then, from downstairs, a faint, sharp sound. Not the wind. A drawer sliding shut. Eleanor froze, heart steady but alert, the taste of sherry turning metallic on her tongue. Her hand brushed the spine of pride and prejudice. Round two, she murmured. And somewhere in the dark below, a door clicked closed. The next morning, Eleanor woke before sunrise. The house felt swollen with quiet, that tense, waiting kind that settles after a confrontation no one wants to admit happened. She brewed her coffee without music, watching the thin curl of steam twist upward, then disappear. Down the hall, the door to Hannah and Tyler's room was still shut. Noah's faint snore came from the guest room. The only other sound was the rhythmic tick of the clock in her study. It was steady, predictable, unlike the people she lived with. She went to her desk, unlocked the top drawer, and took out a crystal paperweight shaped like an apple, a retirement gift from her last class. To anyone else, it was sentimental clutter. But Dean had repurposed it. Beneath the base was a pinhole microphone, wired to a slim voice recorder tucked into a hollowed-out dictionary. Analog again? Dean had asked the night before, when she'd met him in the back lot behind his shop. Always, she'd said, digital things can be erased. Now, she placed the paperweight back in its usual spot on her desk, slightly right of center, angled toward the doorway. From there, it would hear everything. By afternoon, the temperature had dropped. The wind rattled the gutter and the house creaked as if sighing. Eleanor sat in the kitchen with a crossword and her ever-present calm, listening to Hannah move from room to room upstairs. When the younger woman finally came down, she looked too put together for someone staying home on a weekday. Her hair was brushed smooth, her lipstick fresh. She opened the fridge, letting the cold light spill over her face. "You've been quiet today," Eleanor said without looking up. "Just busy," Hannah replied, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water, "catching up on things." "House things?" Hannah smiled tightly. "It's not yours anymore anyway," she murmured. Not loudly, but not softly enough to be innocent. The crossword pen froze in Eleanor's hand. She didn't lift her head. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, nothing," Hannah said, twisting the bottle cap with a hiss. "Just talking to myself." Eleanor turned a page. "You should be careful, Hannah. The house has an excellent memory." Hannah laughed, a brittle sound that echoed just a bit too long, and left the room. That evening, Eleanor sat with Carol at the small table in her study. The air smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. She pressed play on the recorder. The playback was crisp, drawers sliding, footsteps crossing the hardwood, and then Hannah's voice. Steady, dismissive, unmistakable. "It's not hers anymore anyway." Carol leaned back, eyebrows lifting. "That adds manipulation. This isn't just trespass, it's intent. We file that." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Not yet. I want her to believe she's safe." Carol studied her friend. "You're playing a long game." "She's not careless," Eleanor said. "She's confident. Confidence is louder than evidence. Let her keep talking." Later, the family gathered for dinner. Tyler sat between them, the uneasy buffer, while Noah pushed peas around his plate. The television hummed low from the living room. Some home renovation show about restoring old houses. Hannah laughed once, too loudly at something Tyler said. He tried to smile back, but it faltered. His gaze flicked between the two women, the air around them charged like a room waiting for thunder. "You two seem tense lately," he ventured. Eleanor dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. "Do we?" Hannah didn't answer, only clinked her fork against the plate and said sweetly, "Some people just don't like change." Tyler sighed, muttering, "Maybe we should all take a breath." He looked down again, his avoidance as practiced as ever. From across the table, Noah finally asked the question no one else dared. "Why does Mom hate you?" The fork slipped from Hannah's hand and hit the plate with a sharp crack. Eleanor met the boy's eyes gently. "Hate's a heavy word, sweetheart. Some people just don't like being told no." Noah's gaze lingered on her for a moment, wise beyond his 12 years, before returning to his food. The quiet that followed was so thick it hummed. When dinner ended, Eleanor carried the dishes to the sink. Through the reflection in the kitchen window, she saw Hannah standing in the doorway, watching her. No smile this time, no pretense, just a silent calculation behind those eyes, as if each was measuring how much longer the other could stand the tension before something snapped. Eleanor turned off the tap and let the dripping continue. One slow, steady plink at a time. The same rhythm the recorder would capture later, when the house went still again. And as the sound echoed through the empty kitchen, she whispered to herself, "Keep talking, Hannah. The house is listening." By the time Tyler opened his laptop that night, the house was quiet enough to make him uneasy. The television was off, the dishwasher hummed low in the kitchen, and Hannah was upstairs in their room, humming under her breath. That tuneless, careless hum she always used when she was editing lesson plans. He'd been trying to finish a report for the district board when his mother's name flashed in the inbox. The subject line read simply, "For your eyes only." He hesitated, jaw tight, before clicking. The email contained no message body, just one attached zip file. Inside, 6 still images, time-stamped in neat succession. The first few frames meant nothing to him. The study door, Eleanor's desk, the lamplight pooling across stacks of paper. But the third image froze him. Hannah. She was standing at Eleanor's desk, drawer open, phone raised, flash disabled. His own wife, her expression sharp and efficient. A woman rifling through papers that weren't hers. Tyler scrolled faster. Another frame showed her photographing documents, another with the drawer half closed. The timestamps read 2:47 a.m., the same hour he remembered rolling over in bed to an empty space beside him. His pulse quickened. The room suddenly felt airless. For a long time he stared at the screen, hoping for some explanation that didn't exist. Maybe Eleanor had staged it. Maybe it was an old clip taken out of context. But the details were undeniable. Hannah's wedding band glinting under lamplight, her hair pulled back the way she wore it when she worked late, the soft outline of her shadow against the bookshelves. The click of the door startled him. Hannah stepped in, towel slung around her neck, her hair damp from a shower. "You're still working?" she asked lightly. Tyler turned the laptop toward her. "What is this?" Her face didn't move for half a second. Then she blinked, a practiced softness slipping into place. "Where did you get that?" "Mom sent it." Hannah's laugh was thin, brittle. "A setup. Obviously. You know how she's been. Paranoid. Resentful. She's staging things, Tyler. She's trying to turn you against me." "She doesn't even know how to use Photoshop," he said quietly. "That's what Dean's for, isn't it?" she snapped. "Her little tech accomplice? You've seen how obsessed she's become. Cameras, notes, God knows what else. You think this is normal?" Tyler didn't answer. The silence between them was a living thing now. Heavy, breathing, watching. "I was printing something that night," Hannah pressed. "She probably planted that camera to make me look—" "Like what?" His voice was sharper than she'd heard in years. "Like someone who goes through my mother's legal documents at 3 in the morning?" Her mouth opened, then shut. He stood, closing the laptop. "I can't do this right now." "Tyler." He walked past her down the hall. The bedroom door to the guest room clicked shut behind him. The next morning, Eleanor found him in the kitchen, bleary-eyed, sipping burnt coffee. He didn't look at her. "She says it's fake," he muttered. Eleanor nodded once. "Of course she does." He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know who to believe anymore." She reached over and refilled his cup. "Then stop believing. Start observing." By afternoon, she was back in her study. Dean stood by the doorway, toolkit open, fitting a small black scanner into the frame. "Facial recognition," he explained. "Only registered faces can open the door. You, Noah, and Tyler. She tries, it stays locked." Eleanor watched the laser grid sweep across the surface, her reflection fragmenting in red light. "Let's keep it that way." Dean hesitated. "You sure this isn't overkill?" "It's protection," she said. "Overkill comes later." He chuckled softly. "You always were my favorite teacher." She didn't smile. "You were always my best student. You learned to listen." That evening, Carol stopped by, coat dusted with snow, briefcase under her arm. She spread paperwork across the dining table, legal filings, draft letters, a cease and desist template. "This is preemptive," Carol said. "If she tries to challenge ownership, access your accounts, or claim you're unfit, we file this. It's your warning shot." Eleanor nodded, signing without hesitation. "Fire it if you have to." Carol glanced toward the stairs, her voice lowering. "Tyler believes you now?" "Not yet," Eleanor said, capping her pen. "But disbelief has an expiration date." That night, Eleanor walked her usual round of the house, checking locks, lights, alarms. When she passed the guest room, she heard the quiet buzz of Tyler's laptop, the faint blue glow painting his tired face. He was scrolling again through the images she'd sent, fingers trembling slightly over the trackpad. When Hannah's voice called softly from the hall, he flinched and closed the lid. Eleanor didn't move, only watched from the shadows. There was a moment, the smallest one, when he looked toward her study door, eyes hollowed by the kind of dawning realization that can't be undone. She turned away before he could see her. Upstairs, Hannah's footsteps crossed the landing. A door opened, then closed with deliberate slowness. Eleanor paused halfway up the stairs, every muscle still. The new lock hummed faintly from her study, scanning, rejecting. And in that low electric buzz, she heard the first real sound of Hannah losing control. 3 days later, the letter came. Thick cream stationery, embossed with the law firm's insignia. The Pierce family mailbox had never looked so official. Hannah was the one who retrieved it. Tyler was still at work. Noah at school. Eleanor pruning her roses in the front yard. Her gloves, the same shade as the petals. The envelope caught the light. Neat, professional, undeniable. By the time Eleanor came back inside, the letter lay open on the counter, its folds already creased with irritation. Hannah stood beside it, arms crossed, chin lifted like she was bracing for a storm she'd already decided to ignore. "I assume this is your doing?" she said. Eleanor removed her gloves, setting them down one by one. "Carol's, technically. She's the attorney." Hannah laughed, sharp, dry, humorless. "A cease and desist? You think you can sue me for living here?" "For trespass," Eleanor corrected. "And tampering." "This is absurd." Hannah's voice rose. "You're trying to humiliate me in front of the whole neighborhood." "On the contrary," Eleanor said, taking off her hat and brushing off a stray petal. "You've managed that yourself?" Hannah stared at her for one long, dangerous second. Then she reached for the letter, tore it straight down the middle and kept ripping. Slow, deliberate tears, pieces fluttering to the floor like confetti. Eleanor didn't move. When the last scrap fell, she simply said, "You can't shred evidence, Hannah." Hannah's chest heaved once. "You really think anyone will believe your paranoia?" "Not anyone," Eleanor replied. "Just everyone." She left the kitchen then, walking toward her study with the calm of someone whose plan had just reached its next checkpoint. By Thursday, the whispers had started. The faculty lounge at the high school buzzed with rumor. Apparently, the police were called. Someone murmured near the vending machine. "I heard it's about financial documents," another added. "Privacy violation or something." By Friday, a curt email from the district superintendent hit every teacher's inbox. "Ms. Hannah Pierce has been placed on administrative leave, pending review of conduct allegations." The same message appeared, politely phrased but unmistakable, on the HOA community board. A reminder to all residents to respect privacy and property lines. Hannah came home early that afternoon. The front door opened and closed without a sound. Eleanor could tell by the silence that followed, the absence of heels clacking, of chatter or excuse, that the humiliation had finally begun to settle in. She stayed in the kitchen, rolling dough between her palms. The smell of vanilla and browned butter filled the air. Noah wandered in, peering over the counter. "You're baking again." "Stress baking is tactical," Eleanor said, pressing the cookie cutter into the dough. "It gives people something sweet to chew on while the truth sinks in." He grinned faintly. "That sounds like something from your book club." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it's just good strategy." That evening, Carol arrived with her laptop and a sealed envelope. "The restraining order's filed," she said, setting it on the table. "Civil court dates in 3 weeks. She's officially on notice." Eleanor placed a tray of cookies between them, the scent still warm. "Would you like one?" Carol took one, biting into it thoughtfully. "It's strange," she said. "You're calmer now than when this began." "Because she's not." Carol smiled wryly. "You know she's going to retaliate." Eleanor's expression didn't change. "Then I'll document that too." That night, rain moved in. Soft at first, then insistent. drumming against the windows. Eleanor stood at her study window, watching the reflection of her house lights flicker across the wet glass. She could see Hannah's shadow through the frosted panel of the front door, standing there, unmoving, not knocking, just watching. The security light blinked on, flooding the porch in harsh white. Hannah turned away quickly, disappearing into the storm. Eleanor exhaled, steady and slow. The rhythm of rain against the roof matched her heartbeat. Even, composed, ready. Behind her, the facial recognition lock blinked green, then blue, scanning, resetting. In that small sound, she found reassurance. The system saw what mattered. It recognized who belonged. She turned off the lamp, whispering into the darkness. "You can rip paper, Hannah, but not consequences." Outside, the storm hit harder, drowning the street in white noise, and beneath it, faintly, the sound of a car door slamming shut. Saturday morning arrived brittle and cold, the kind of chill that made the whole neighborhood sound sharper. Sunlight glared off melting puddles. Inside the Pierce house, silence had settled again, that tense, uneasy kind that came after too much pretending. Noah padded barefoot down the hallway, clutching a sketch pad and a mug of cocoa. He'd been trying to draw the maple tree outside, but his pencil kept wandering, shading shadows where there weren't any. He heard the faint hum of the dryer, the scrape of his mom pacing the kitchen, and, beneath it all, the house's quiet breathing. He paused outside his grandmother's study. The light was off, the door locked, but on the small desk just outside, a stack of papers sat half-tucked under a notepad. Eleanor must have forgotten them last night after writing. Curiosity was a kind of inheritance in this house. He'd caught it from her. He lifted the top page. Her handwriting looped tightly across the lines, neat and deliberate. She's coming for what isn't hers. Control isn't love. It's possession. Some people have to lose everything to understand ownership. Noah frowned. The words sounded like something from one of her book club thrillers, except he recognized the tone. The same quiet sharpness his grandmother used when she wasn't teaching a lesson, but setting a boundary. He didn't notice Hannah in the doorway until she spoke. "What are you reading?" He startled, the paper crinkling in his hand. "Grandma's journal. I didn't mean—" "Give it to me." Her voice was tight, not angry yet, just controlled, the dangerous kind. He hesitated. "Why?" "It's hers." Hannah stepped closer, hand outstretched. "Because she's poisoning you against me, against all of us. Don't you see what she's doing?" Noah clutched the page instinctively to his chest. "She's not lying." Something inside her broke. "What did you say?" "You were in her study," he blurted. "You're the one she meant." Hannah's eyes flashed, sharp, frightened, furious. She reached out, snatching for the page. When he didn't let go, her hand came down, a sharp crack that echoed across the hallway. The paper fluttered to the floor between them. Noah's cheek stung. He stared at her, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "You hit me." For a second, Hannah looked horrified. Then the mask slipped back into place, tight and desperate. "You don't understand—" "Mom!" Tyler's voice came from the bottom of the stairs. He'd heard the slap. His footsteps were slow, careful, like a man walking through glass. Hannah turned. "It's not what it looks like." He was... Tyler's eyes flicked to Noah, then to the paper on the floor. He bent, picked it up, read the words once, twice. The silence stretched so long it felt like the air might split open. When he finally looked up, his face was pale, jaw set in something that wasn't shock anymore. It was decision. "Get out," he said quietly. Hannah froze. "Tyler, pack a bag. Tonight." She took a step forward, searching his face for a trace of softness that wasn't there. "You can't just—" "I said get out." His voice didn't rise, but it carried the kind of weight that ended arguments before they began. Noah's eyes were wide, his breath quick. Hannah stared between them, husband and son, and for the first time she looked smaller than the space she occupied. She turned sharply, storming down the hall, the sound of drawers and zippers breaking the silence. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, unseen, her hands wrapped around the banister. She hadn't meant for the boy to read those words, but perhaps fate had better timing than she did. Minutes later, the front door slammed. Tyler gathered Noah's jacket from the hook, handed it to him. "Go wait in the car," he said softly. When the boy left, Tyler looked up toward the landing. Eleanor met his gaze, not triumphant, not smug, just unflinching. "She hit him," he said, voice cracking. "I know," she replied quietly. "The house told me." He closed his eyes, nodded once, and left without another word. Through the window, Eleanor watched the car pull out of the driveway, headlights cutting through the dusk. Rain had left the pavement slick and reflective. 2 streaks of light fading into the street. The house, for the first time in months, was silent. And downstairs, a single piece of paper still lay on the floor, creased, damp from a fallen tear, her handwriting blurring only at the edges. "She's coming for what isn't hers." Eleanor bent, picked it up, and smoothed it flat again. Then she whispered to the empty air. She came. She lost. Outside, somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, low, approving, final. The house on Meadowlark Lane had gone quiet. Not peaceful, empty. For the first time in years, Hannah Pierce could hear every sound the place made without her. The refrigerator's hollow hum, the faint click of the heating vents, the echo of her own footsteps bouncing off walls that no longer seemed to welcome her. She hadn't turned on the TV in 3 days. The silence felt punishing, but she couldn't stand the noise either. Noise made her think someone might answer back. She sat at the kitchen table, her phone screen lighting up with a notification from the district's HR portal. Administrative leave extended. Pending review. Below that, a single unread message from Tyler. "We're staying at Mom's for now. Don't contact Noah." Hannah locked the phone and set it face down. The house creaked again. Slow, deliberate. Every sound felt like judgment. Outside, rain had turned the yard to mud, and the flower beds Eleanor once tended looked strangled by weeds. Hannah pulled her cardigan tighter, realizing too late that the chill wasn't from the air. It was from absence. She whispered to herself, "She wanted me out. Now she's got it." But even saying it aloud didn't sound like victory. It sounded like surrender. Across town, Eleanor's home glowed warm under the soft amber of porch lights. Noah's backpack hung by the door. Tyler's shoes sat neatly beside it, 2 quiet confirmations that peace had returned, however temporarily. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as Noah helped his father set the table. Their voices carried easily, low, familiar, safe. When she joined them, Noah looked up with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in weeks. "It finally feels normal again," he said. Eleanor smiled back. "That's the goal, sweetheart. Normal is underrated." She poured sweet tea for the boy, coffee for Tyler, and water for herself. It was a ritual more powerful than any victory, the ritual of reclaiming a home. The next morning, Dean parked his van outside and carried 2 new cameras up the front walk. "Exterior coverage this time," he said, gesturing toward the eaves. "One above the porch, one facing the driveway. Motion sensors only. Nothing online." Eleanor nodded, holding the door for him. "Keep it analog. I like knowing my evidence isn't floating somewhere in the cloud." He smiled faintly. "You really don't trust the modern world, do you?" "I trust paper, locks, and people who show up when they say they will," she said. Dean installed the last camera under the gutter, testing the range. "That should do it. No one sneaks up on you again." She stood beside him on the porch, watching him pack up his tools. "No one ever will," she said. By afternoon, Carol arrived in her usual black coat, briefcase under one arm, and a calm efficiency in her step. She laid a folder on the dining table, neatly labeled, final pages clipped together. "Everything's ready," she said. "The lawsuit's airtight. The restraining order stands, and the county's acknowledged your trust filings. If she tries anything, even an appeal, we've got preemptive injunctions drafted." Eleanor read the top page, her glasses low on her nose. "How long before she's notified?" "Today. Officially by courier." Carol smiled faintly. "I almost pity her." Eleanor closed the folder, aligning the corners with deliberate precision. "Don't. Pity's what she mistook for weakness." They shared a quiet look. Carol had seen enough clients crumble. Eleanor, she realized, had done the opposite. She'd solidified. That evening, the familiar laughter of Eleanor's book club filled the study again. The women sat in their usual spots, steaming mugs in hand, the faint scent of sugar cookies drifting through the air. Marjorie teased, "We thought you'd given up hosting forever." "Temporary sabbatical," Eleanor said lightly. "Some chapters just take longer to close." The group chuckled. Someone asked what they'd be reading next month. "Something about privacy and accountability," Eleanor said, almost playfully. When the laughter died down, she felt Noah's small hand slip into hers. He'd been sitting quietly on the arm of her chair, sketchpad in his lap. "Grandma," he whispered, "the house doesn't make those weird noises anymore." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "That's because it knows we're safe again." He nodded solemnly, then added, "Do you think she's okay?" Eleanor looked toward the window, where dusk pressed softly against the glass. Beyond the light, the dark outline of Hannah's old car sat parked a few houses away. Not moving, not approaching. Watching. She smiled faintly, a teacher's patience hiding a strategist's certainty. Eventually, people learn what silence means. The doorbell rang, one clean chime that cut through the laughter. Every voice in the room stilled. Eleanor rose slowly, smoothing her skirt, her expression unreadable. "Stay here," she said to Noah, then walked toward the door. Outside, a shadow moved past the frosted glass. Familiar height, familiar stillness. Eleanor's hand hovered over the lock. For the briefest moment, she thought she heard the whisper of rain again, like memory looping back. Then she straightened, her voice calm and cold as the night beyond the door. "You can knock," she said softly, "but that doesn't mean I have to open." The door remained closed, and from behind it, just the sound of silence, thick and waiting, the kind no one could fill. The courtroom smelled faintly of old varnish and anxiety, that particular blend of paper, perfume, and fear that Eleanor had always associated with bureaucracy. The overhead lights buzzed softly, and the flag behind the bench hung utterly still. Hannah sat at the petitioner's table, posture perfect, hair pinned tight, the mask of professionalism clinging to her like armor. Tyler was nowhere in sight. Eleanor sat across the aisle beside Carol Tran, her hands folded neatly over her leather notebook, calm and still as a portrait. When the bailiff called the case, Pierce versus Pierce, the murmur of spectators dropped into an expectant hush. The judge, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, adjusted her files. "Let's make this efficient," she said. "Ms. Pierce, you allege harassment, unlawful surveillance, and defamation by your mother-in-law, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Hannah said smoothly. "She's been documenting me, spreading rumors, installing cameras." "Allegedly," Carol interrupted without looking up. "With reason." The judge raised a brow. "We'll see." Carol stood and approached the bench with measured calm. She laid down 3 envelopes and a small USB drive. "Your Honor, these are timestamp materials. Analog footage, handwritten logs, and supporting statements. The defendant has cataloged every alleged intrusion with verifiable dates. The judge gestured to the bailiff, who gathered the evidence. Proceed. Carol's voice stayed even, almost conversational. My client documented a consistent pattern of trespass into her locked private study. She did not distribute these materials until after the petitioner initiated baseless claims of harassment. The footage you're about to see is from March 9th. The judge pressed play. On the small courtroom screen, the grainy black and white image appeared. Hannah, 2:47 a.m., slipping into the study, rifling through papers, phone camera flashing faintly. Every second of it unfolded in brutal, undeniable quiet. When it ended, the room was so still that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to stop. The judge leaned back. Ms. Pierce, that's you in the video? Hannah's mouth opened, then closed. That could have been altered. It wasn't, Carol said, producing a notarized statement from Dean Murphy and a sworn affidavit from the camera's chain of custody. Analog media. No Wi-Fi, no external edits, just motion-triggered footage. My client is old-fashioned, Your Honor. Fortunately for her, that's also tamper-proof. Eleanor watched Hannah's expression shift from defiance to disbelief, then to something smaller. The moment realization sank in that she'd lost more than a case. The judge flipped through the handwritten logs, each page marked with dates, precise entries, and Eleanor's looping script. I've seen many fabricated records, she said, almost admiringly. But this isn't one of them. This is consistency. This is what documentation looks like. She looked up, her tone turning crisp. You trespassed. She documented. Case dismissed. The gavel hit wood like a full stop. Outside, the air was bright and cool. Carol exhaled, finally letting herself smile. I don't often get instant dismissals. That was surgical. Eleanor adjusted her coat. Teachers learn precision early. They stepped down the courthouse stairs. Across the street, a small knot of neighbors from the HOA had gathered. Familiar faces behind sunglasses, whispering as they pretended to check their phones. Eleanor could almost hear the words traveling. She won. The old woman was right. By sunset, the HOA newsletter hit inboxes. Community reminder. Respect personal property and privacy boundaries. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary review. Underneath, a brief note from the board president. We commend Ms. Eleanor Pierce for her diligence and professionalism in resolving a difficult situation within our neighborhood. Hannah's name wasn't printed, but everyone knew. The next morning, Carol arrived at Eleanor's house holding a certified envelope. Official restitution, she said. $15,000 in damages. You could frame it. Eleanor signed the receipt, then placed the check between 2 pages of a children's book on the counter. Donate it, she said. Fort Collins Literacy Fund. They could use new books. Carol smiled. Always poetic justice with you, isn't it? Eleanor poured her a cup of tea. Justice isn't poetic, it's recorded. Meanwhile, across town, Hannah sat in her car in front of the district office, watching her phone screen flash. An email from the Colorado Department of Education had arrived. Subject: Notice of Review. Teaching license status pending. Her reflection in the glass looked nothing like the woman she'd rehearsed being. For a long time, she just stared. At her own name in the email header. At the world outside that kept turning without her. She turned off the ignition, and the silence rushed back. That night, Eleanor stood in her study, the light warm and steady across her desk. She tucked the court documents into a labeled folder, case closed, and slid it into her filing drawer. Outside, the camera above the porch blinked once, recording a calm house, a quiet street, and a woman who no longer needed to look over her shoulder. And yet, before turning off the lamp, Eleanor paused. The air in the room was still, Too still. She glanced toward the window, and for the briefest moment thought she saw the faint outline of headlights idling at the end of the block. Her hand hovered over the curtain, but she didn't move it. Instead, she whispered, "Drive away, Hannah. There's nothing left here to steal." The lights flickered, then disappeared into the night. But the hum of the camera outside continued, patient, vigilant, eternal. The next morning broke soft and gold, light spilling through the lace curtains in Eleanor's study like forgiveness she hadn't asked for. The air smelled faintly of dust and old books, her kind of peace. On the desk sat the hollowed Pride and Prejudice, its purpose fulfilled. The analog camera inside was quiet now, its small red diode forever dark. Eleanor traced a finger along the spine before opening the book one last time. The tiny SD card lay where it had always been, square, unassuming, heavier than it looked. She slid it out, holding it between her fingers, marveling at how something so small could change the direction of so many lives. She placed the camera and card inside a small oak box lined with velvet, the same one that once held her husband's watch and her teaching medals. She locked it, turned the key twice, and whispered, "Thank you for the truth." A knock came from the front door. Dean stood there, jacket unzipped, the smell of engine grease clinging faintly to the cold air around him. He gave her a crooked grin. "Came to see if you wanted me to wipe the footage for good. Fresh start." Eleanor considered him for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "History deserves its evidence." He nodded slowly. "You know, most people would burn it." "I'm not most people." "That's true." He smiled faintly. "You're a teacher. You grade the test even after the students already failed." She laughed, genuinely this time. "And you're still quoting metaphors like you're trying to pass my class." Dean tipped an imaginary hat and stepped off the porch. "Then I guess I'll give you an A for closure." That afternoon, the sound of shovels and laughter drifted in from the backyard. Tyler and Noah knelt beside the study window, dirt streaking their jeans, a flat of pink and white impatiens waiting to be planted. "Make sure they get morning light," Eleanor called from the porch. "Yes, ma'am," Tyler said, glancing up with the sheepish grin of a man rediscovering ease. Noah pressed the last seedling into the soil and looked over his shoulder. "Can I paint the sign now?" "Of course." He ran to the patio table, where a small wooden plank and jars of acrylics waited. With careful strokes, he painted each word, tongue between his teeth in concentration. When he was done, he held it up proudly. "Private study, knock first." Eleanor smiled, eyes shining. "Perfect." He hammered it into the ground beside the window. The sign gleamed in the sunlight, not as a warning, but as a promise. That evening, Carol dropped by with a bottle of wine and her usual irreverent humor. She set 4 glasses on the table, even poured one for Noah. A splash, for celebration only. When they toasted, Carol lifted her glass high. "To receipts, literal and legal." Dean laughed, and Tyler shook his head. "You're all terrible influences," he said. Eleanor smiled. "That's what keeps life interesting." The laughter that followed was soft, real, the kind that didn't echo off tension but sank comfortably into the walls. After they'd gone, she lingered by the window, watching the flowers nod gently in the breeze. The security lights flickered once, adjusting to dusk, then steadied. For the first time in months, the house was entirely still. No hidden footsteps, no hum of suspicion. Only the sound of the wind brushing the shutters and Noah's quiet humming from upstairs. She sat at her desk, pen poised over her journal, and wrote in neat, looping script, "Camera retired, case closed, home restored." Then, after a pause, she added one more line. "Peace requires proof, but once you have it, you can finally let go." Eleanor closed the journal, locking it in her desk. The oak box stayed on the shelf, sealed, silent, unforgotten. Outside, the garden glowed under the soft porch light. The sign Noah made swayed faintly, the paint still drying. And though she couldn't see it, Eleanor knew that just beyond the edge of the fence, the neighborhood had gone quiet too. A calm born not of fear, but of understanding. She leaned back in her chair, exhaled, and whispered into the stillness, "Good night, old friend. You've done your job." The house breathed with her, but as she turned off the lamp, the porch camera blinked once, just once, as if to remind her that peace, like vigilance, was never absolute. The letter came on a Tuesday. Plain envelope, government seal, no return address. Eleanor found it folded in her mailbox between a hardware store coupon flyer and a community newsletter about the upcoming neighborhood yard sale. She didn't open it. Not yet. She didn't need to. The silence of the street told her what it already said. By noon, the local news vans were parked outside Hannah's subdivision, their satellite dishes glinting beneath the Colorado sun. The headlines spread fast, first online, then whispered in grocery aisles and school parking lots. Local teacher violated elder's privacy. License revoked after court evidence surfaces. The anchors said her name with the kind of false neutrality reserved for people whose reputations are too small to sue. The story played twice an hour. A single clip ran beneath the headline. Hannah, exiting the courthouse weeks ago. Expression hard, lips tight. When the broadcast ended, Eleanor turned off the television and looked out her front window. The impatiens were in full bloom, their petals trembling in the breeze. Tyler's car was parked in the driveway. Noah's bike leaned against the porch rail, the wooden sign still standing bright and new beside the garden. She didn't smile. She just breathed. The quiet kind of breath that finally reached the bottom of her lungs. That afternoon, the mail came again. A small cream envelope. No name. Just her address written in looping handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, sliding out a single card. Thank you. No signature. No return address. Just those 2 words in blue ink, written with the shaky precision of someone who'd debated sending it at all. Eleanor traced the letters with her fingertip, reading them twice before setting the card atop her journal. For the first time, she didn't need to document the moment, because she already knew what it meant. Across town, someone had finally understood the lesson. Later, Carol stopped by, coat draped over one arm, phone buzzing with messages from reporters. "They're asking for a quote," she said, settling at the kitchen table. "You could tell your side, you know. Set the record straight before the narrative gets away from you." Eleanor poured 2 cups of tea. "The record's already straight," she said. "It's on paper. Filed. Time-stamped." Carol smiled. "Always the archivist?" Eleanor's lips curved faintly. "She tried to rewrite my story. I just returned it to nonfiction." They drank in companionable silence, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and Noah humming from the next room, the rhythm of peace settling into habit. When Carol rose to leave, she touched Eleanor's shoulder gently. "You did the right thing," she said, "even if it doesn't feel like it." Eleanor looked toward the study door, the one with the new sign and the steady lock. "It feels exact," she said. "And exact is better than right." That evening, Noah appeared in the doorway holding a sheet of paper. "I made you something." Eleanor turned from her desk. "What is it?" He held it up, shyly proud. A drawing, colored pencil on thick sketch paper, of her study as seen from outside the window. The shelves, the desk, the glow of lamplight spilling out like gold. And in the garden below, the new flowers blooming around the sign. She took it from him, eyes softening as she noticed one small detail. In the corner of the picture, he'd drawn a tiny lock etched in silver pencil, gleaming at the center of the door. "I wanted it to look safe," he said. It does, she murmured. It is. She framed the drawing that night, hanging it just above her desk, beside the shelf that held the oak box and the camera she'd retired. The next morning, Carol's voice played over the radio, talking about elder privacy rights, citing Eleanor's case as precedent. The host called it a quiet revolution, a story about proof and power. Eleanor listened for a moment, then switched the radio off. She didn't need the commentary. She stood at her window, sunlight spilling across her face, watching the impatience sway in the breeze. She tried to take my room, she said softly to no one in particular. I made it evidence. The house was still again, humming with the quiet of satisfaction, of order restored. But just as she turned away from the glass, she noticed something on the curb. A car idling far down the street, headlights dimmed. Too far to make out the driver, but close enough for the unease to return like a forgotten echo. Eleanor's hand rested lightly on the curtain, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement. A shape behind the windshield, watching. Then the car eased forward, tires whispering across asphalt, until it disappeared around the corner. She didn't follow it with her eyes. She simply whispered, "Keep driving." And behind her, the camera light, the one she'd sworn was off, blinked once, as if in quiet agreement. It arrived on a Wednesday. No return address. Just Eleanor's name typed neatly on the envelope. The postmark was blurred, as though the machine itself had hesitated to claim it. She turned it over in her hands several times before opening it. The stationery was cheap, motel kind, the sort that smudged when touched. Inside, a single page. Eleanor, I never meant to hurt you. Things got away from me. I just wanted to feel seen, to matter in that house. You made me feel invisible. I'm sorry, even if it's too late for that to count. Hannah Eleanor read it twice, expression unreadable, the paper trembling slightly between her fingers. Not from emotion, but from the faint draft coming through the study window. She folded the letter once, sharply, and slid it into the folder labeled Case Closed. It fit perfectly between the court order and her handwritten logs. No tears, no reply, just filing. Some stories, she thought, don't end with forgiveness. They end with record-keeping. That evening, Tyler found the letter. He'd come into the study looking for an old family photo Noah wanted for a school project. When he opened the file drawer, the white envelope caught his eye. He recognized the handwriting immediately. He read it standing by the window, the same window Hannah once peered through to watch Eleanor's quiet routines. His jaw tightened as he reached the final line. Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. You don't have to read that. He looked up, eyes hollow. You kept it. I keep everything, she said softly. He stared at the page again, those small, desperate words pretending to make peace. And something in him broke, quietly, the way glass cracks before it falls apart. Without a word, he stepped past her, out the back door, into the dusk. In the backyard, the air smelled faintly of ash and blooming impatiens. Tyler crouched by the fire pit, struck a match, and watched the flame catch along the edges of the letter. For a moment, the words glowed. I never meant to hurt you, before curling black and vanishing into ember. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window watching through the glass. She didn't stop him. Some pages weren't meant to be archived. When he returned inside, she was at the sink, rinsing the teacups. He said nothing, only met her eyes. The look between them said enough. It's done. Later, Noah wandered into the study, pajamas soft and rumpled, hair a halo of sleep. He climbed onto the arm of Eleanor's chair, resting his head against her shoulder. Dad said we don't have to talk about her anymore, he murmured. Eleanor nodded. That's right. Is it over? She looked toward the window, the new flowers glowing pale under the porch light. the little wooden sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. "It's protected," she said. "That's what matters." Noah thought about that for a while, his small hand tracing the edge of her sleeve. "Protected feels better than over," he said finally. She smiled faintly. "It usually does." He fell asleep like that, curled against her side, the piece between them soft and fragile as tissue paper. Outside, the night was quiet. The garden shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight, each petal glistening like it had something to say, and had finally chosen silence instead. Eleanor carried Noah to bed, tucked him in, and returned to her study. She sat down, opened her journal, and wrote only one line before closing it again. "Peace, sustained, by vigilance." She stood, turned off the light, and paused in the doorway. The faint hum of the porch camera still carried through the quiet. Low, steady, alive. For the first time, she didn't resent the sound. It was the pulse of protection, the heartbeat of a house that had learned to defend itself. As she climbed the stairs, the wind picked up, rustling the flowers outside. The wooden sign creaked once, a reminder, not a warning. And somewhere far down the street, a car door slammed, then faded into distance. Eleanor didn't turn to look. The study stayed dark behind her, untouched, locked, and finally, completely at peace. The folding chairs were arranged in neat rows under the skylights of the Fort Collins Public Library. The late afternoon sun painted the floor in long amber stripes, turning even the dust in the air into something sacred. A hand-lettered poster at the entrance read, "Community Forum, Privacy, Proof, and Personal Boundaries. Guest speaker, Eleanor Pierce, retired educator." Eleanor adjusted the microphone at the small lectern. Her hair was swept neatly into its usual twist. Her notebook lay open beside a half-empty mug of tea. The crowd was modest, 30 people, maybe 40. But their attention was total. "When people think of privacy," she began, "they think of solitude, a locked door. But true privacy," she paused, glancing up, "isn't about isolation. It's about respect." Her voice carried, firm but calm. "In my case, respect had to be relearned, the hard way. Someone I trusted entered my space without permission. She didn't break in. She simply walked through an open door and assumed the room would forgive her for it." A ripple of quiet agreement moved through the audience. "I learned that proof isn't just about defense. It's about reclaiming your truth from those who rewrite it. Documentation, boundaries, vigilance. They aren't paranoia. They're preservation." When the applause came, it was soft, restrained, the kind that comes from people who understood every word because they'd lived something close to it. Afterward, Dean Murphy lingered until the crowd thinned. He approached the podium with a small box in his hands, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "Couldn't resist a parting gift," he said. Eleanor arched an eyebrow. "Dean, you've already given me enough gadgets to outfit a spy movie." He grinned. "This one's symbolic." She untied the string and opened the box. Inside was a gold-plated SD card mounted on a small wooden plaque. The engraving read simply, "Proof." Eleanor's throat tightened in the way gratitude sometimes disguises itself as restraint. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He shrugged. "Consider it a medal for surviving modern paranoia. Or mastering it," she corrected. They both laughed quietly, the easy sound of two people who understood that vigilance could be both burden and art. The following week, Noah sat cross-legged on the study floor, surrounded by towers of journals. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paper, the sunlight catching on the brass corner of her old desk. "Grandma," he asked, squinting at the looping handwriting on one spine, "what's the difference between Memory 1983 and Memory 1983? Revised?" "One has mistakes," she said, stacking another pile beside him. "The other has understanding." He grinned. You really keep everything, huh? Everything worth remembering. He nodded and began alphabetizing them with serious concentration, small fingers brushing against decades of her life. Each journal thudded softly into place, like bricks in the wall of a fortress that would never fall again. That evening, the house filled with the familiar murmur of book club chatter, Marjorie, Carol, and the others returning to the same chairs they'd once occupied when gossip was the only war fought here. The impatiens outside glowed through the window, their petals swaying in the faint summer wind. Marjorie raised her mug. Feels good to be back in this room. Carol smiled, settling beside Eleanor. Full circle. Eleanor looked around. The shelves in order, the desk gleaming, the air light again. She entered without knocking. She said quietly, her voice steady. I closed the door with purpose. The women fell silent, not out of discomfort, but reverence. Noah, listening from the stairs, scribbled something in his sketch pad. A new drawing of the study. The people inside it laughing again, light spilling across the walls like forgiveness that had earned its place. Later that night, the house was still. Tyler stood on the porch, looking across the street at the for sale sign in a yard 2 blocks away. Thinking about moving? Eleanor asked, stepping beside him. He smiled faintly. Closer. Not in. You deserve your peace. She nodded. Peace is best shared by choice, not proximity. He chuckled softly. You always sound like you're teaching a class. Old habits, she said. They stood together for a moment, watching fireflies blink across the garden. Inside, the porch light flickered once, the old camera's reflex still kicking in, as if the house itself refused to forget what vigilance had built. Eleanor turned toward the doorway, the study behind her glowing softly through the window. She snuck into my study each night, she murmured, a small smile tugging at her lips. So I installed the camera she feared most. The door clicked shut behind her. Not loudly, not with anger, but with finality. Outside, the garden swayed under the moonlight, a quiet witness to the kind of victory that didn't need noise to last forever.